the right size tank for your fish.
That's exciting.
And for you. Here we go. So maybe you're looking for a new tank for a brand new setup. Or perhaps you have a tank already with fish in it, but you're starting to have some doubts. I mean, even I have some doubts with my 240-gallon African cichlid tank Alcatraz, but they don't last very long. In this video, we'll look at the right size tank for you and your space, the right size tank for your fish, and at the end of the video, I'll give you my own personal policy on how I determine what size tank I need for any type of fish. But we will look at the general community fish, as well as those wild and crazy African cichlids. First off, what's the right size tank for you and your space? There are lots of things you need to take into consideration for this one.
You will subscribe. Ding ding. Just take a look at my home for starters. Before we bought this house, I knew there would be a tank right here in the entryway and another big one right around the corner. And I also planned on putting a smaller one here, but now we store our high chairs for the grandkids there. So I tried to get her to let me sell one of the entertainment centers and put a nice, beautiful tank there. Lost that one too.
This sucks.
Not really a lot of other options to work with here since we have windows and doors all along the back wall, the kitchen right next to it, and that leaves a nice solid chunk of nothing for me to work with. I do have a nice empty bedroom to use now since my daughter moved out, as long as my wife buys in on it, or I move my tanks in before she knows about it. But here's my point. Look at the space you have and make sure you want to dedicate that space to a fish tank. Make sure it won't be in the way and that there's a power outlet there. If you only have space for a 29-gallon tank, then that's the right size tank for you. And knowing that will help you decide which fish you can have, since you now know your size limitation. Besides that, you have other considerations to think about, like how much can you afford to spend on a tank? $10?
Son of bitch, shit!
No tank for you. Will a used tank do the trick? That'll save you a bunch of money, but you'll lose a little sleep wondering if that thing won't spring a leak on you. Let's say your budget allows you to have a $300 tank and you're dead set on a new one, then you aren't buying a 55-gallon tank by a long shot. After you buy the tank, stand, filters, heaters, that's right, I said heaters plural because you're going to be setting up 2 heaters and a heater controller like a good fish keeper. After you buy all that, your $300 is gone and you have a 29-gallon tank. Besides location and money, think about how much time you want to spend on your tank. The larger it is, the longer the water changes take. However, if you just have fish that don't produce a lot of waste in your tank, then you'll be able to get by doing those water changes less frequently than you have to do with a smaller tank. As they say, dilution is the solution to the pollution, or whatever it is. Because of this, larger tanks are also more forgiving than smaller tanks. A drop of polluted water in a 5-gallon tank will wreak a lot more havoc than a drop in a 300-gallon tank.
Just be aware that if you go for a larger tank, like a 75-gallon or above, you want to make sure that your floor can handle that kind of weight. A 125-gallon tank, for instance, that weighs about 2,100 pounds, just filled with water. Add everything else to it, the sand, the filter, and all that, and you're looking at about 2,500 pounds. Add a 180-gallon tank to your house filled with water, you're looking at about 2,100 pounds. Add everything else to it, and you're at 2,500 to 3,000 pounds. That's a lot of weight for those joists. So you want to make sure that you at least put it along the outside wall, which will help support the weight, and you want to run those joists perpendicularly to the tank, and that'll help evenly distribute the weight along those joists. But that still probably isn't enough support for those larger tanks. And I've heard people say, well, just get a couple of 200-pound guys and stand on that spot and see if the floor moves. Okay, first of all, for a 180-gallon tank, you're gonna need about, 15 guys to stand in one little spot to see if the floor moves?
Well, how do you do, neighbor?
And even if your floor is strong enough to support that kind of weight initially, what's it gonna be like in about, say, 10 to 15 years after that tank has been there for a while? Is it gonna start to sag slowly? And if it starts to sag, then your tank will be uneven, and that can cause a leak. Or what if the whole thing comes toppling down? You can add your own supports, or you can pay a contractor to come in and add some supports in those joists to make sure it can handle that kind of weight. Better to be safe than sorry. So what size tank do you have, or are you going to choose, and how did you come up with that idea? Let us know in the comments. Well, let's take a trip down to PetSmart and just see what kind of fish tanks that you can get there. This won't by any means be an all-inclusive selection of sizes and dimensions for you, but there are quite a few choices. Here are some smaller options on one of the shelves. Just remember what I told you about smaller tanks though. It seems like you could be less dedicated to maintaining your aquarium than with a larger tank, but it's the complete opposite. Don't get lazy with a smaller tank. Well, actually don't get lazy with any tank, but you know what I mean. Come on. This 20 high is 24 by 12 by 16.
These are rough measurements, leaving off the fractions. May be good for some tetras and maybe some bottom dwellers. You could go with a nice 40-gallon breeder at just 36 by 15 by 17, which is a good size for some smaller schooling fish like neon tetras. This all-in-one kit is only $150, but I'd stay away from letting corporations choose what equipment you want to use. Just buy your gear separately from your tank and you'll get better stuff. A 45 tall doesn't take up a lot of room and has that extra space top to bottom, if your fish like that kind of thing. Even though it's larger than the others we've seen so far, it is very narrow. Not a lot of turnaround for your longer fish.
Tight, very tight.
A nice bow front for you if that's your cup of tea. They also have a 50-gallon low coming in at 48 by 12 by 18, a 60-gallon with a little extra headroom, a 75-gallon, which I already showed you because I have one, and then this, the big guy, the 125. This is your entry level into the world of 6-foot and larger tanks. Nice.
It can be difficult to find any tank 125 gallons or larger, so many people just go online and get their tanks. A couple of popular sites include glass cages and custom aquariums, and if you go on there and calculate your dimensions and then extras like glass clarity and things like that, you're going to be amazed at how much these tanks cost. But right about then, just click on that calculate shipping button. What? For this reason, I bought my tanks at Fish Tanks Direct because first of all, the tanks cost a little bit less, but then they also don't charge shipping, which is fantastic. But just be aware that they are acrylic and acrylic scratches super easily. So now that we've taken a look at what size tank is good for you and your space, how about those fish?
I took a trip down to my local fish store, Fish World, in Spokane, Washington, to get some clips of different varieties of fish, since I'm limited at my house to whack job cichlids. Yes, even one of my angelfish is now classified as a whack job, attacking everybody. I won't be able to show you everything and what each fish needs, but remember, I'll tell you my policy in just a bit that helps with almost any fish. We will hit a few though. Remember those 5-gallon tanks at PetSmart? Well, these bettas hardly move at all and don't need a lot of room, and their beauty is rivaled by no other. Shrimp don't mind close quarters either. Look, he's a shrimp. You'd think these neon tetras would be great in a small tank like that, since they're so small. But you'd be a fool to put these in a 5-gallon tank. They may be small, but they love to school, swimming back and forth all day long. For this reason, you're looking at a 20-gallon minimum, in my opinion, and I wouldn't even put them in anything smaller than a 3-foot tank personally. And I think online, if you look around, you'll find that they recommend a 10-gallon.
No, it's too small.
These pencil fish do this all day. Just sitting there. But even though they hardly ever move, they get to be about 8 inches long, so you need a bit more room than you'd think for them. These Juraparis seem like they'd fit fine in a 10-gallon tank, right? If you take the time to read about them though, you'll see that they get 8 inches or so and they need room to move. I wouldn't put one of these in less than a 75-gallon tank myself. Ooh, look at these guys. These Oscars are really ugly, but they're also really cool. Evil people, I mean uneducated people, buy them when they're about 2 inches long and put them in a 20-gallon tank or 55-gallon tank and call it good. These fish get up to about 12 inches long and they're girthy. Big boys that need room to move. Just check out this super brilliant sequence of shots involving my Adidas Ultra Boost shoe, measuring in at 13 inches, slightly larger than one of these fish, and different tanks. Just showing the turnaround room alone is crazy. This fish ain't turning around in my 10-gallon. Here it is with my 23-gallon, my wife's 55-gallon. Still not much room with the 75-gallon, is there? And here it is with the 180. Looking better, right? But still, could give a little more room. Besides fish size alone, your tank size will be determined by your selection and number of fish, how active those fish are, filtration, and the amount of water changes you can do realistically and faithfully.
By the way, you may have heard of the 1 inch per gallon rule, where it's 1 inch of fish per gallon of water to determine how many fish you can put in your tank. That's complete garbage. There are lots of ways to determine how many fish you can put in your tank, and that ain't one of them. Whatever tank size you come up with, make sure that you've researched the fish. And if you have a wide variety of fish in your tank, then make sure that you can accommodate the needs of the fish that needs the most room. African cichlids are a special needs fish. They have severe disabilities. Disabilities in that they're always trying to kill each other or they're refraining from killing each other. They also like open swimming space to swim back and forth in. So you'll want a tank where they have enough room to hide from each other and where they also have room to swim back and forth. For this reason, you'll want a tank with a larger stretch.
You've probably read that African cichlids need a minimum of a 75-gallon tank. And I think that can work for a few of the smaller ones, but I'd never overstock a 75. Too cramped in there. It'll work fine when they're juvies, but as they get larger, of course there's less open swimming room for them and less room to hide from each other. And they need to hide.
Your ass is grass and I'm gonna mow it.
So if you're planning on a 75 for your Africans, I'd think long and hard. If you do go with it, I wouldn't stock more than a handful in there, and only the ones that don't get any larger than 6 inches or so. I'd stick with the ones who have a bit less psycho in them too, like the blue neon. Remember that you'll never know if they'll be bursting with crazy until they mature, but there are some guys that are less likely to. If you guys have any suggestions for typically less aggressive peacocks that would work here, drop them in the comments. So that leaves those with the more heavily stocked tanks and those with larger Africans. Remember, bigger is always better with fish tanks. So I'm talking about the bare minimum. Here we're looking at a 6 foot long, 125 gallon minimum if your guys aren't going to get larger than 6 inches or so. Personally, I'd spring for the 180 if you can manage it and give them the extra leg room. Wait, fish don't have legs. Whatever.
That one's dumb.
With any larger African cichlids like the Venusis that get almost a foot long, you're going to want to start considering not only the length of the tank, but also the turnaround room. So for this reason, I would recommend a 180 gallon tank size minimum for a fish that size. That's going to give them plenty of room to swim back and forth, and then that 2 feet depth will give them room to turn around in. If all you have room or money for is a 6 foot long tank, then I wouldn't go with any fish larger than a foot long. So I told you I'd give you my own policy on how I determine what size tank I need for my fish. And it's quite brilliant, actually. So here's what I do. I just take the minimum suggested tank size for a fish, and I up it one. I don't go with the weird tank sizes, like I'm not gonna go a 75 to a 90 gallon usually. But let's say you have a 10 gallon suggestion, I'll go with a 20. If it's a 75, I'll go with the 125. If it's a 180, I'll go with the 240. You can't go wrong with this. It's going to give them a little extra room to make them happy. And we all want our fish to be happy, right? Right. So what do you think? Do you have the right size tank for your fish already? Or if you're just thinking about getting a new tank, did this info help you determine what size tank you're going to need for those fish? Let me know in the comments. We all learn from each other. You've been watching the Cichlid Charmer, and as always, thank you for watching. I'll catch you next time.